I reached home. I saw Colleen holding our 5-year-old brother's hand when I entered. As soon as he saw me, he came running towards me with happiness. He looked around, then towards the floor, as if searching for something. I knelt and lifted his head. I asked, "What's wrong, Max?" He answered my question with, "Where's Nolan?" "He's getting ready to drive us to school," I said. He looked at me with a confused look and asked, "Why? You told me he's hot enough to be able to go anywhere shirtless." I laughed, got down to his eye level, and said, "It's due to the place we are going to." He looked at me with a blank face and asked the reason for it. I rolled my eyes and said, "It's frowned upon there." He accepted my answer and said, "Oh." Then there was a knock at the door, and Max ran to open it. Then I heard my mom greeting Nolan. Nolan said, "Hi, Miss Dixon." Rose said, "So, just a heads up, my daughter has been saying you're hot enough to go anywhere shirtless." Nolan laughed and asked, "Is that so? Please tell me more about it." I ran out of the kitchen and said, "It's not true." Nolan looked at me, walked closer to me, leaned down towards my ear, and whispered, "Judging by the color of your face and the change in your tone, it's evident you are lying." I backed away and said, "Okay, fine. I did say that." He smiled and looked at Max. Max ran up to him, hugged his legs, and said, "It's about time you got here. What took you so long?" Nolan frowned and seemed apologetic as he said, "I'm sorry. I had to get ready for school." Max pointed towards him and said, "Well, you should go to school shirtless." Nolan laughed, saying, "I can't, as it's against the rules." Max crossed his arms and said, "So make them want you to come shirtless to school." Nolan opened his mouth and didn't say anything for a moment. He finally shook his head and said, "I don't know what to apply." However, it's not going to happen. Max groaned before asking, "Why not?" Nolan laughed and said, "Well, this amount of hotness can kill a person. Ask Nyla. She almost died last night." Max seemed shocked by what Nolan had just told him, but no one had expected him to respond with, "You almost killed my sister? Why? I thought you loved her. You're not supposed to kill the ones you love." I looked over at Nolan and saw him muttering. Then my mom asked, "What did you say, Nolan?" Nolan clenched his jaw and said, "Oh, nothing." I grabbed Nolan's hand and said, "Mom, I'll meet Max and Sophia in the car." She smiled and nodded in agreement. I then turned towards Nolan, grabbed his hand, started pulling him towards the front door, and said, "Let's go, Nolan." He wrapped his arm around my shoulder and walked outside to the car with me. Once outside, I punched him in the face. He placed his hand up on his face and asked, "What was that for?" I frowned and said, "They have found us." He looked at me shocked and asked, "What? How?" I took a deep breath and said, "I don't know. I just have a bad feeling about it. By the way, what were you muttering inside?" He glanced down, let out a breath of air, and said, "I had muttered that Max should say that to my brother." He looked towards the house and saw Colleen and Max heading towards the car. They opened the door and settled in. Nolan started the vehicle and we drove off. First, we went to drop off Max off at his school. After he left the car, I turned around and looked at Colleen. She looked between Nolan and me and asked, "Is everything okay?" I sighed and said, no. The Dark Hearts have found us. I don't know how, but they let me know about them monitoring my movements. A look of terror got etched on her face as she started yelling, "No, no, no. It can't happen. We were careful and vigilant of our surroundings." I placed a hand on her knee and said, "I know." She put her hands over her head, her face inside. I squeezed her knee a little and said, "Everything will be fine, don't worry." She took a deep breath and said, "No, it won't." I smiled and said, "I know it won't." She calmed down after 5 minutes. We reached the school and got out of the car. Nolan and I started walking towards the school with Colleen right behind us. Nolan turned towards me and said, "Go with her and help her get settled. I will see you in class." Then he kissed me, and Colleen and I headed towards her homeroom. Once inside, she sat in her seat and waited for me to say something. I finally broke the silence and asked her, "Sophia, are you going to be okay here?" She nodded in the affirmative, and I headed towards my homeroom. When I walked in, I saw a new girl talking to Nolan. She had chestnut-colored hair and green eyes, and was trying to flirt with him. I walked over and sat next to him. Once I was seated, all his attention got directed towards me. I turned around and looked at her as she smiled. I smiled back and said, "Hi, I'm Nyla. What's your name?" She smiled at me and said, "Sonia." I pulled out my book and said, "I see you have already met my boyfriend." She smiled and said, "Yes, I have. We should get together sometime and have some fun." He looked at me and asked, "What kind of fun?" Sonia licked her lips and said, "Well, sexually, of course." Nolan and I exchanged looks. I looked back at her again angrily and refused her proposal. Nolan looked at her and said, "We have refused your proposal mainly because I don't want to be involved sexually with anyone other than her, and I think she feels the same." I crossed my arms and replied, "Yes, I feel the same." She smiled and said, "Okay, I get it. Then we can be friends." We looked at each other, then back at her and replied in unison, "Okay." She pulled out a piece of paper and asked, "So which teachers do you guys have?" I looked at Nolan and said, "Well, we have all the same teachers till the last period." Sonia seemed shocked and said, "Oh, can I see your schedules?" I shrugged and said, "Sure." Our classes take place in homeroom. The first period is taken by Mr. Elliott, the second is Miss Scott, and the third is by Mr. Powell. The fourth period by Miss Summers, and fifth by Mr. Wilson. And the sixth period is Miss Avery. In contrast, Mr. Erickson takes Nolan's sixth period. She smiled and said, "Oh, I guess I get to break off with you, Nolan." Nolan and I looked at each other and knew something was wrong. I turned back to face Sonia and asked, "How did you get the same schedule as him?" She smiled and started to talk, but the announcement started, so everyone needed to remain quiet. I began to think about them finding me and about her being one of them. People stood reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. Once it was over, I sat back down and Nolan placed a hand on my shoulder to comfort me. He asked me, "Are you okay?" I didn't even look up at him and just shook my head in the negative. I heard Sonia going through her purse. After she had finished rummaging through her bag, she poked me in the back and I turned around to face her. She held out a piece of paper and said, "Somebody asked me to give this to you." I was shocked and asked, "Who asked you?" Sonia smiled and said, "Read it and you will find out yourself." I opened the letter and started reading. "Dear Elena, I regret to inform you we managed to find you. I should explain the way we did. We saw you for the first time 2 years ago when you visited San Francisco. God, I was glad to see you, happy and healthy." Then the half-breed got out of the car. I didn't know about you sleeping together or being in a relationship until then. So I started gathering information about you and found what I needed. You are in a relationship with him, though you and I should be in a relationship. Now he will die on your 18th birthday, and you will get forced to eat his still beating heart and start consuming human blood. Come to the river alone at midnight, and I will spare your and Nolan's families. If you don't, they all will die. Your beloved Nathaniel. I slammed my fist on the table, and everyone looked at me. I sat back and grabbed my phone. I scrolled down through my contacts and stopped on Shane's number. Then I messaged him. The message read, "Shane, we have a problem. They have found us. They know about you still being alive and are threatening to kill my family. It would help if you ran immediately." I sent it and saw Nolan looking at the note over my shoulder. He seemed to be angry as he read the message. I wondered if Nolan is prepared to fight if a situation demands it. I also asked whether Nolan and Sonia knew each other before he met.